Good afternoon, everyone. Friends of Blue, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues. It's fantastic to see you all here. Thank you so much for coming to our second Out of the Blue, our annual event where we share with you a quick canter through our work, our triumphs, our struggles, our latest thinking. It's quite a challenge cramming a year of Blue Marine into 2 hours, given that over the last 2 weeks, for example, we've attended 5 conferences, spoken with presidents internationally, helped secure extraordinary 30 by 30 commitments, reached potentially 1 billion people in the press, declared war on the French, and put on an opera. And that's just 2 weeks. As you know, our strategy is focused on trying to secure protection of at least a third of the ocean, tackling overfishing, and restoring vital habitats. So, in the world of ocean conservation, there's been, in the last couple of years, what Shakespeare would have called a sea change. First, the Global Biodiversity Framework, setting the world on the path to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030, and then the High Seas Treaty, making it possible for the first time to protect nearly 2/3 of the ocean beyond national jurisdiction. Sadly, these global goals often go unmet, as we know. But just in the last 2 weeks, it feels as if momentum is suddenly picking up, at least in our quest to reach 30 by 30. It needs to, of course, because we're desperately running out of time. But there is at last genuine movement at intergovernmental level. And this creates opportunities for us in ocean conservation like never before. To quote a bit of Shakespeare, given that he died 408 years ago today, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. On such a full sea, we are now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves. At Blue Marine, we're doing our damnedest to take this tide at the flood, cajoling, helping, prodding, even suing governments. We will not rest until our work is done and we see our oceans, on which we all depend with our lives, properly protected and managed. Thank you all so much for coming, and enjoy. I'm now going to hand over to Joe, who will be comparing our first section. Joe, let's stick it to the man.
Don't worry, we're here now to cheer you up with our reasons to be cheerful. So do take your phones out of your pockets and take notes as you wish. As I say, we're going to kind of whistle-stop through 8 different places and projects to show where ambition and tenacity meet to drive positive change. And we're going to start in the Dominican Republic, where just the week before the Our Oceans Conference in Greece, the government made a huge announcement. So it's over to Dan and Sophia.
So a few years ago, we were at the United Nations Oceans Conference in Lisbon, and we met with the Environment Ministry of the Dominican Republic. And they were profoundly disheartened because their Environment Minister, Orlando Jorge Mera, had been assassinated in office for denying oil and gas exploration permits. And, you know, slightly rashly, we agreed at that point to help them in their ambitions to protect their environment. Several years later, 2 weeks ago, Claire attended a ceremony with their president, Luis Abinader, and he declared 30.8% of their marine environment protected. I'll leave Sophia to come in with the details of what happened.
Thank you, Dan. So the first marine protected area is in the Southern Caribbean Sea off the coast of the Dominican Republic. It's called the Beata Ridge, and it's called a ridge because it's basically an underwater seamount chain. And seamount chains are usually home to diverse deep sea corals, such as this one. And they look very different from surface tropical reefs, but they can be among the most diverse ecosystems in the ocean. Next slide, please. So leading up to the protection and the declaration of the Beata Ridge as a marine protected area, there were several expeditions, scientific expeditions, organized and led by local partners and supported by Blue Marine. So actually, Dan and Jude, who's in the room, were part of the last scientific expedition. And results from the scientific expedition showed that the Beata Ridge is not only a hotspot of deep sea coral diversity, but it's also a nutrient-rich migration corridor for several species, including a variety of whales, sharks, sea turtles, dolphins, and even rare seabirds, which sometimes stop on their flights and feed off those waters. And perhaps most excitingly, it was also confirmed that the Beata Ridge is a nursery ground for the critically endangered oceanic white-tip shark, which you can see up here. And oceanic white-tips are apex predators that are very important in regulating the health of ecosystems. You'll hear more about this later towards the end of today. But the wonderful thing about strategically protecting areas like the Beata Ridge is that you're not just protecting the ecosystem itself, but the benefits of that protection are rippling beyond that, and in this case, across the Caribbean Sea and to wherever the species are migrating next. So for the second marine protected area, which is the Silver Bank, we have to cross over to the Atlantic side of the Dominican Republic right here. And the Silver Bank is the principal mating and breeding ground for the western North Atlantic humpback whale population. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard that humpback whales play a huge role in storing the carbon from our atmosphere and in helping us regulate our climate. To put that into perspective, an oak tree, which is one of the most efficient trees in capturing carbon, can capture up to 12 tons of carbon in their 500-year lifespan. And in comparison, a humpback whale can capture up to 33 tons of carbon, that's twice the carbon, in 80 years. These blue spots that you see up here, that's where whales spend their summers, feeding in nutrient-rich waters. And they'll feed there as much as possible before they have to swim, give or take, 5,000 miles south to the warm waters of the Dominican Republic, which is a very long and difficult journey. And they start to reach Silver Bank around December, and they stay there until April, giving birth. So the reason that Silver Bank is such an ideal breeding spot for whales is not just because the water is warm, but also because in the northeastern edge of the Silver Bank, you have these beautiful large coral structures, such as this one. This is Dan during our expedition. He was impressively free diving, and behind him is a massive coral head. And these coral heads, there's many of these on the edge. And what they do is they create a shelter by breaking the waves of the Atlantic, absorbing their energy, and creating this very beautiful marine sanctuary for the whales. So this is a picture that one of our partners took during the expedition. This is a very large mother and her baby calf, which we estimated was about 5 to 7 weeks old. And what's amazing is that while they're there, the whales are still fasting. They still haven't had anything to eat since they left the North Atlantic. And that's pretty remarkable because they're very busy not just giving birth, but after they give birth, they're teaching their babies how to free dive, how to swim, how to hold their breath for longer. And they're also breastfeeding. And our local guide there told us that the whale milk is kind of like a toothpaste consistency because it's 50% fat. And that makes it easier for the calf to catch in the water, but also it allows them to gain up to 50 pounds a day. And this way they can survive the long migration back to the North Atlantic. And finally, it's a very social scene in the Silver Bank because the whales are also, after they've given birth, of course, they're mating for their next reproductive cycle. So you'll be there, and if you're lucky enough, you get to hear these very magical whale songs underwater that the males can do for up to even 20 minutes. And they're jumping, and they're trying to impress the females. So it's a very special place. And this is one of the many reasons why the Silver Bank is a critical marine ecosystem for many species, but especially for the survival of humpback whales, the North Atlantic humpback whales, and why we're also happy that the Dominican Republic took this bold and ambitious step in protecting this very special place. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophia, if that's not a reason to be cheerful, I don't know what is. Now to Greece itself, which last week surprised the world and now leads Europe in its commitment to properly protect its waters. And I'm completely delighted to welcome my colleague and friend Angela to the stage to talk to us about Greece.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse my Greek accent. Last week was indeed a historic moment for marine conservation in Greece, as the government committed to expanding our current MPA network from 20 to 32%, and also to banning bottom trawling in all MPAs gradually until 2030. And even though Greece has the poorest history in marine conservation in Europe, one cannot deny that this is an ambitious commitment, and it has already started the conversation amongst other countries about bottom trawling. But the good news doesn't stop here. During our ocean conference that took place in Athens last week, the Minister of Rural Development and Food, who is responsible for fisheries, announced publicly the government's commitment to protect the island of Amorgos, embracing the local fishers' long-standing ask for protection. Amorgos is a tiny, a small but mighty island in the heart of the Aegean, where small-scale fishers are writing history and are in the front line of marine conservation, demanding for protection of their island. Specifically, they are asking for the protection of the creation, of 3 no-take zones, and also the creation of a restricted area around the island where they want to ban fishing in April and May, 2 months that are important for the reproduction of a lot of species. But they're not just demanding this, they are already taking action ahead of policymakers, as for the last 3 years they have been abstaining from fishing some days in those 2 months, and instead they have been using their boats to collect plastic debris from their coastline. These fishers are taking a step back so our seas can move 2 steps forward. Blue Marine Foundation has been on their side for the last 2.5 years, supporting them in every step towards success. We are delighted that these years of hard work had paid off, and now we have the announcement of the minister that he will protect these 4 areas. We are very happy because this is a unique case in Greece. It is a shining example of cooperation between fishers, scientists, institutions, the civil society, local and national authorities, with the common goal of protecting the seas, but also the local fishers' livelihoods. The success of this initiative can play a vital role in the way we protect our seas in Greece, and it can become a beacon of hope, of inspiration and positivity for other fishing communities in the Aegean, in Greece, but throughout the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. It was absolutely, completely thrilling to be in Greece last week as they made these enormous announcements. And as I say, put Greece really ahead of everybody else in Europe, particularly in the Med. Now, from Greece to the magnificent Blue Belt and our UK overseas territories where commitments are still being made to extend its world-leading areas of protection, I'd like to welcome Adrian now to talk to you a little bit about that.
So while blue might on occasion be known to make life difficult for politicians and governments when they're not doing the right thing, and we like to prod and poke them, we also like to give praise to governments and to politicians when they do the right thing. And we're happy to say that one of those examples of politicians doing the right thing is the leadership that the UK government has shown over the past 14 years in partnership with the UK overseas territories, communities, and local governments. So through shall we say, an accident of history, the UK is the custodian of no less than 16 overseas territories around the world. And as it happens, usually because of their extreme remoteness, they also happen to be some of the last great wild places left in the world's oceans. And they're also extremely ecologically representative of different parts of the world, different temperatures, different latitudes, and so on. So, Blue Marine Foundation has been working with the UK government and with overseas territories since 2010, when we were engaged with the Chagos Archipelago in the Indian Ocean. And then we've subsequently been involved with Pitcairn Islands in the Pacific, the three largest, this one's, for example, over 800,000 square kilometers in size, absolutely vast. Then the three largest MPAs in the South Atlantic, St. Helena, Tristan da Cunha, and South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. Then also Ascension Island. We are not actively involved in the British Antarctic Territory, and the Blue Belt program is moving into the Caribbean. So it's an amazing program, and it's one that was formalized under the Blue Belt program in 2016 under David Cameron, and every prime minister since has added to this amazing record in partnership with local communities. So even Rishi Sunak has managed to add to the Blue Belt program, and that was in February this year at South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands in the South Atlantic. So this is a vast and very special place. It's actually the most biodiverse place in all of the UK overseas territories. It was abundant with whales, and unfortunately was, as a result, very heavily, the whaling industry in the Southern Ocean was based here. A lot of British whalers, Norwegian. And the good news is, reasons to be cheerful, not reasons to be glum. Reasons to be cheerful is that now the humpback whale population in the Southern Ocean has bounced back to 90% of its pre-whaling numbers. Amazing figure and something to be really cheerful about. Now, the humpback whales live off of krill, this zooplankton that aggregates in absolutely vast scales in the Southern Ocean. But also humans like to industrially fish krill, and we use them for aquaculture, and we use them for human consumption, and they are being extracted at a vast scale, primarily down closer to the Antarctic Peninsula. There is not yet krill fishing in South Georgia and the South Sandwich Islands. So working with the UK government and a number of our NGO partners led by the Pew Bertarelli Global Ocean Legacy, and with Minister Bennion in the Foreign Office, and with the government of South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, we've engaged with a review process to try and protect and put large amounts of this area out of industrial fishing. So the latest available science shows that there is what we call a humpback highway, which travels down where the whales travel down from the warmer waters in Brazil in order to feed on the krill off of the peninsula, and they approximately follow this route. So the UK obviously has no jurisdiction outside of its own territorial waters. So we successfully managed to engage with the government and secure this corridor here to be completely out of bounds to any potential future krill fishing, which is a great result for the ocean. And it's an area, to give you some scale down there, 166,000 square kilometers in size, which is, for context, 8 times the size of Wales. So Wales without an H, I should say. Yeah. So this is something to be really proud of as a country, and we would urge all of you. We're currently in the process of trying to enamor the Labour Party with what a wonderful policy this is, and make them also feel proud of it. And we feel they are, and so they should be, because they've supported it from the outset while in opposition. So should any of you be chatting to any Labour politicians over the coming months, please do remind them of this amazing world-leading policy programme that the UK is doing, and the amazing value for money it provides. Can you believe it only costs £10 million a year to protect 4.3 million square kilometres of ocean? That is an area 1.5 times the size of India. And if you break it down, it's £1.86 per square kilometre protected per year. I mean, unbelievable. Surely among the best value conservation anywhere in the world. Reason to be cheerful. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Somebody's been doing their maths. So now we're going to fly you back over the Atlantic to the British Isles with another island making leaps towards protecting its waters. Here's Freddie Watson from Jersey.
Thank you, Joe. Growing up in Jersey on this tiny 9 by 5 mile piece of granite, Jersey will always be very important to me. And I'm very proud that Jersey is a reason today for us to be cheerful. So one of the great things about Jersey is that it's a self-governing crown dependency. And combined with being a small island where you can literally bump into the environment minister on your weekly shop, politicians and civil service are very accessible. And this means that Jersey and we can get stuff done. Now, our main goal in Jersey since 2018 has been to secure 30% of its waters as MPAs, namely protected from dredging and trawling. This has taken the form of a marine park campaign, and to inform this, we have led and supported a huge amount of research, which has found that existing protected areas in Jersey are outperforming unprotected areas around them. We've also found that a very special unprotected reef has 1,000% higher levels of biodiversity compared to the areas around it. We've also found that by protecting 30% of waters, we could provide £40 million in ecosystem services. And also we found that blue carbon habitats draw down over 10,000 tonnes of carbon a year. The campaign also has other strands where we support and develop methods of low impact fishing, like helping to set up Jersey's first ever hand dive scallop processing unit. And we also provide an immersive educational experience within our snorkel trails, where this year over 1,000 students between the ages of 9 and 11 would have taken part within our snorkel trail education program, and that's within about 2/3 of all primary schools in Jersey. Now, with this map here, we have packaged up this whole campaign into a proposal, and we tabled this proposal about 2 years ago, and this is what you can see on the screen now. So here you can hopefully see those small green areas around the island on the north and to the south of it. And these are the areas that are already protected from mobile fishing gear. And importantly, because they're protected from trawling and dredging, they're actually quite good MPAs. Now, Jersey has a responsibility under the Global Biodiversity Framework to protect 30% of its land and sea. And with these existing MPAs covering only about 6.5% of our waters, the simple way to put it is that we want to expand those green areas to the black dotted line to cover 30%. Now, the legislation and motivation is there. The government just need to do it. Next slide, please. About a year and a half after tabling our first proposal, the government finally revealed their holy grail of marine management. And in particular, this includes a proposal to protect 27% of Jersey's waters from dredging and trawling. So these are the dark blue areas here. And this 27% that you can see around our territorial waters looks awfully close to the 30% that we tabled about 2 years ago. So it makes us think that we were definitely on the right lines. Next slide, please. Now, this proposal is in draft, and it's due to be voted on later this summer in Jersey. So there is still a lot more to do to ensure politicians vote this through. And even after it's voted through, the government still needs to legislate and deliver. We need to make sure they do that. So to put this all into perspective, if Jersey got this 27% close to trawling and dredging, and that the activity inside the MPA is well managed, Jersey would be this little underdog sitting at the front of the pack in the mission to achieve 30 by 30. And I think that is a reason to be cheerful. Thank you.
Thanks, Freddie. We always love an underdog sitting at the front of the pack. Now, if you're not jet lagged, you're going to be now, because we're taking another transatlantic trip to the Dutch Caribbean. Welcome to the stage, my colleague Fiona.
Hello. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. So there are plenty of reasons to be cheerful about the Dutch Caribbean, which is a region where Blue Marine has been working for the past couple of years. For those of you that don't know, the Dutch Caribbean consists of 6 islands in the Caribbean Sea. We have 3 autonomous countries, Aruba, Curacao and St. Martin, and 3 municipalities of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Statia, Saba and Bonaire. And all of these islands have incredible marine biodiversity and globally significant marine habitats, including coral reefs, mangrove forests and seagrass beds. Thank you. Over the past year, we've seen big commitments for large-scale MPAs in Aruba and Curacao. Aruba has committed to designating a whole EEZ, or a whole marine area, I should say, MPA across their entire waters. And in Curacao, the commitment has been to designate a 30% no-take offshore MPA. And Blue Marine is now working with local partners and local governments to help realise these commitments. Additionally, last year, we saw the legal designation of the Ya'ari Shark and Whale Sanctuary. Now, this sanctuary spans the marine areas of Bonaire, Saba and Statia. And Blue is now working with the Dutch government to develop a marine management plan for the area. And we're looking to expand this area across to the other 3 Dutch Caribbean islands as well. At the local level, we're delighted that we have been building incredibly strong relationships with local partners, the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, and local NGOs across the 6 islands. We've been supporting small-scale but very important marine conservation initiatives successfully as well, in education, habitat and species monitoring, and also laying the groundworks for further MPA designation and effective management. Now, these are all vital to protect key marine species and habitats, encompassing local knowledge and including local communities. And in Saba, we were really delighted in October when our local partner there was able, with support and funding from the Blue Marine Foundation, to open a brand new Marine Research Centre, which will support local research and monitoring. Blue's reputation for technical and collaborative expertise has also enabled us to partner with local governments in the Dutch Caribbean. The government of Curacao, for example, formally requested technical assistance from Blue Marine to develop Curaçao's first ever nature policy plan, which we are currently working on and is due to be published later this year. The plan will lay out ambitions for how Curacao can recognise, value, protect and manage its biodiversity, and will act as the foundation document for nature-based action and advances in ocean protection. In St. Martin, we've also enabled support for a legislative review of their existing MPA, and this will pave the way, importantly, for expansion of that marine protected area and further zonation of it, which will include crucial no-take areas. Finally, with funding from the Blue Nature Alliance, we are now working to further strengthen collaboration within marine conservation across the 6 islands and regionally throughout the Caribbean Sea. There is a huge amount of appetite in the region for reaching 30 by 30 and enhancing marine conservation initiatives from small scale to large scale. And Blue is really, really delighted to be supporting these ambitions and this progress. Many reasons to be cheerful. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Now, from the turquoise waters of the Caribbean to the perhaps lesser glamorous, but by no means less exciting North Sea, where we ask, is there life in the old Dogger yet? Over to Charles Clover, who I can tell has forgotten that he was doing this section. Here he comes now.
So, the Dogger Bank, Tom alluded to earlier, as being one of the great post-Brexit green dividends. We managed to get the British government to actually apply European law in British waters, because that was the only law left when the Common Fisheries Policy went away. And we managed to get them to protect an area that was already a marine protected area, but wasn't protected in the way that the European Union has this strange way of doing. And we have actually done that, and I think it was June 2022. All trawling and dredging ceased on the Dogger Bank. And so last November, I thought somebody ought to go and have a look under the water and above the water at what was happening and what had come back, or whether it was healthy or not. And one of my perceptions was that this is 60 miles off the Yorkshire coast. I had no idea there were grey seals just popping up and having a look at you. What they do at night, I don't know. Maybe the backstroke is probably the answer. But, you know, I mean, they're there. And the other thing was these fantastic seabirds that you see that you normally only see on holiday in Britain in the summer, like puffins and so on, which I'm going to. But kittiwakes, little auks, I hadn't really seen little auks in such numbers. In this area, which the UK's bit alone is nearly the size of Belgium. It's a huge area, and you know, flooded only about 8,000 years ago. So it's a recent addition, and at that point, of course, Britain was just a promontory of the continent of Europe, something that one or two people tend to forget. Anyway, we went and we had a look, and next slide, please, Hamish. And we found all sorts of stuff coming back. These are dead men's figures in the foreground. Sponges. We found we found that wonderful thing, the mollusk that lives for 500 years. What's it called? My mind's gone blank. And we found all sorts of fish. And just using this habitat. And this habitat had actually been accreting for about 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years in the places that we went. This is the richest part of the Dogger Bank, which is somewhat in the path of some wind farming activity, which might not be catastrophic, but is certainly recovering. And the reason for that is the second reason to be cheerful. And that is that Britain has banned fishing for sand eels in all of its waters in the North Sea. Sand eel is the base of the food chain. Most of the birds that eat it are doing poorly. Most of the mammals that eat it are doing poorly. Most of the fish that eat it are doing poorly. So banning fishing for it, you'd think, was a very good thing. But a reason to be grumpy is that as of last week, two reasons to be cheerful, one reason to be grumpy. The reason to be grumpy is, of course, that the European Commission, as of last week, decided to challenge Britain's decision to protect the sand eel under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement because they think that it is counter to it. The Danish fleet, which catches so many sand eels and which was trawling this area, but we have actually been ratcheting back the sand eel fishery for some time, hence the restoration of all this seabed habitat, and eventually the fish and birds that will come and live there. But we have got to challenge what they are doing, the European Commission, because this is an entirely cynical activity, largely stirred up by, I think, France and Denmark. Denmark has a vested interest. France just has a vested interest in causing trouble to anybody who tries to stop trawling. So the UK has to resist. If you know any politicians, tell them we just no. Non is the answer. That's what the French said to everything we said, so we say non to them. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Charles. If anybody was going to stick a reason to be grumpy in the reason to be cheerful section, it was going to be Clover. Look, we've talked a lot about protecting today, but there are obviously some areas that are so degraded we need to go in and actively restore. So I'm delighted to welcome Eric, who's going to tell you about one of our wonderful projects there, which is even more delightful because of how many partners and project partners that we actually enable it through. Over to Eric.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Lovely to be speaking to you this afternoon. As mentioned, I'm Eric. I'm the Solent Project Officer, and I have the fantastic job of starting my timer before I do start. But I have the fantastic job of working down in the Solent on what is a UK pioneering project. Hamish. This is the Solent Seascape Project. Now, I'm sure a lot of people in the room are aware that Blue Marine Foundation's been working with oysters, restoring the oysters in the Solent for a number of years now, and this has all led us down the path to the point where we're now restoring the entire seascape. So we're not just looking at our old faithful, the oyster reef, but we're also restoring 8 hectares of salt marshes, 7 hectares of seagrass meadows, and 10 brand new seabird nesting sites. So we're incredibly ambitious, and this is the first of its kind multi-habitat restoration project happening in the UK. So again, really ambitious, really pioneering. So what we're aiming to do here is back together these crucial habitats, reconnect them to create a sort of a mosaic like we used to have before this became degraded. So what we're doing is bringing each of these habitats up to a point where it's self-sustaining, where we don't need to intervene anymore. So how are we going to get there? We are going to do active restoration. This is what I'm mostly involved in. This is the getting more oysters on the seabed, planting our seagrass seeds, putting in retention barriers for sediment in the salt marshes. But we also need to better protect and manage these habitats at the same time. Otherwise, all our good work will be undone. How are we going to do that? We're going to do that through our scientific monitoring program, which we're doing with the University of Portsmouth, one of our 10 different partners on the project. And we're also engaging our local Solent community. So we're inviting people from the local community to come and take part in a recovery plan that they design themselves, but also getting loads of volunteers in to help us with all of that active restoration work as well. So, Hamish, if you hit the next slide. I'm going to stick to talking about oysters because it's what I know best. And this is what it ends up looking like. So our active restoration, we go out there, hundreds of tons of material. We put that on the seabed. That creates the foundation for a brand new oyster reef. We then get hundreds of people. A couple of weeks ago, myself and the Solent team, we had well over 120 people come in over 4 days to help us clean just over 5,000 oysters, which we weighed, tagged and measured. And we put them down on our reef with the local harbour master, again, working with these different partner organisations in the area. And this one in the bottom right, that red material, that's the culture on the seabed. That's us making a real difference down there. And through our scientific monitoring, we already know that of the 2 reefs that we've built, we've seen an increase in biodiversity in our reef sites and also a decrease in the number of invasive species in the area. So we've got the proof, early proof that this work is making a real difference down there on the seabed and involving hundreds of people in the local community. And yeah, just really proud. And that's what it looks like at the end of a good hard day's work out on the water. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
I prefer my relaxation in a dark room, but you can do yours on a boat. Finally, from hyperlocal to global, we're now going to take a look at blue carbon and welcome Gabriella Gilks and Gail Fordman from the Convex Seascape Survey Project.
So famously this month, the UN Climate Change Secretary, Simon Still, gave a speech entitled 2 Years to Save the World. He was referring, of course, to the urgent need for climate change policy reform. But today we thought that we'd share a little of Blue's enthusiasm for marine nature-based solutions to climate change. And in particular, how the Convex Seascape Survey is helping to solve an important piece of that puzzle. So, the ocean is our planet's largest carbon sink. And by that, of course, we mean that it absorbs more carbon than it releases, and at least some of that carbon is locked away indefinitely. Currently, it stores 38,000 gigatons of carbon, which is 38,000 billion tons of carbon, a lot, or about 16 times the amount that the terrestrial biosphere absorbs. But the IPCC, which is the intergovernmental group that looks at climate change, has recently suggested that we need to remove a further 5 billion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, in addition to urgently decarbonising each year in order to stay below the 2-degree limit of the Paris Agreement. So the question then is what proportion of this 5 billion tonnes can marine nature-based solutions provide? Well, I'll fast track to the answer. The answer is 3 billion of those 5 billion tonnes if blue carbon ecosystems like the ones that we've been hearing about from all my colleagues today were allowed to operate at their optimum capacity. So the black dots are what they currently are able to do, and the coloured circles are the potential of these different habitats. But there's a bit of a complexity here, and you'll notice, of course, that the largest coloured circle, the 1.5 billion tonnes of carbon, could be saved from not dragging bottom-towed mechanical fishing gears along the bottom of the ocean, stirring up all the organic carbon that's contained in the mud,
causing a set of processes, complicated fluxes within the water column that causes some of that carbon to be re-emitted to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide and contributes to climate change. So 1.5 billion tonnes, but there's a problem in that currently global carbon budgets don't allow for these complexities at all. In fact, you'll see there that the ocean is, the value that they've put is nil for this, and the ocean is still a carbon sink. So enter the Convex Seascape Survey, and Gail's going to give us a bit of an overview of why that's important.
Thanks, Gabby. Can everyone hear me? So our team is really urgently trying to figure out what this missing value actually is. And we are 2 years into our 5-year programme. We've assembled a team of nearly 100 experts who are all working tirelessly to fill this knowledge gap. Thank you. So I just really wanted to share with you today a special success that we've had from our recent Earth system modelling. So this map actually shows exactly why that global carbon budget that Gabby was just showing you is missing a piece. So in this animation, we've quantified exactly how much carbon flows into and out of the ocean. And the regions that are turning blue are areas that are absorbing CO2 and acting as a sink. And those regions that are turning red are actually emitting CO2 back into the atmosphere from the sea. So the really important takeaway from this GIF is that it's a two-way street and carbon can be transferred in both directions. And that's really important to understand because we as humans and how we treat the seabed can actually alter these processes. Next slide, please. Now, we're realizing that offshore industries, especially trawling and dredging for fish, and also infrastructure for oil and gas, can have hugely destructive consequences for these seabed habitats, disturb carbon stores, and possibly also could be exacerbating climate change. But the good news is that we're collecting the empirical data that's needed in order for us to really unpick this whole system and understand not only what the human sort of influences are, but also what role biodiversity has to play. And benthic invertebrates in particular play a very important role in sequestering carbon from that water column down into the mud. And actually, those animals that live in the mud, they move a quantity of sediment every single second of every single day that's equivalent to 12.5 times Mount Everest. So we really shouldn't underestimate them. Now, we've been doing our field work in the Western Isles of Scotland, testing out our methods. But over the rest of this year, we're going to be expanding our field work across the globe to the world's major ocean biomes. And very shortly, there'll be open source data available, not only to update these carbon budgets, but also to hopefully drive forward policy in the right direction.
Our ambition here is bold and clear. We want to tap into the immense power of the ocean, and particularly its seabed habitats, for helping to strengthen climate change policy. These habitats are just the most amazing carbon-absorbing habitats, and the more that we have of those, then the more allies we have in our fight against climate change, and of course, the more reasons we have to be cheerful.
Thanks so much, Gail and Gabby. Now, you've all made it to the end of Reasons to be Cheerful. Now, we're going to race forward and on to what the future holds and how to get there. Here's David Tudor, our programmes director.
Thank you, Joe. That was great. A couple of sessions. So we got one session left. We're charging towards our refreshments, and now we're going to tell you how we're going to charge towards 30 by 30. So we've heard today really about sticking it to the man, and we've also heard about reasons to be cheerful. So now that thick sea fog is starting to clear and we're shifting, we can start to see clearly now towards a potentially positive future. And we've also heard a lot today about that kind of almost mythical number around 30 by 30. So science has told us that, you know, we need to protect 30% of the planet, and that includes 30% of the ocean. And that should be highly or fully protected by 2030. That means no destructive fishing or harmfully extractive activities. And that target was enshrined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Diversity Framework back in 2022. And let's remember really that that figure of 30%, you know, what it says is at least 30%. So, you know, we've got 6 years or so to get to that figure. we're currently somewhere around 8% of the ocean under some form of ocean protection. Now, if you're thinking about highly or fully protected, it's a lot less than that 8%. So we need to speed up, to say the least. So we're going to hear from 3 excellent speakers before we get our break, and we'll have some more questions at the end. So Dan, Jude, and Rory, each of them are going to give you some insight on how we can really charge towards that target of at least 30% of the ocean protected. So firstly, we're going to hear about a rescue plan for SDG 14 on the path to 30 by 30. Dan Crockett, our Oceans and Climate Director. Over to you, Dan.
Thanks, everyone. Extraordinary perseverance and tenacity from the crowd. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about. Next slide. Does anyone know who this is? Well, the man holding the guitar in the middle. Leonard Cohen, exactly. This is Leonard Cohen on the Greek island of Hydra. He's sitting next to Marianne, his great love. I'm not sure who the guy in the middle is. It might be Marianne's husband. He looks a little bit upset by the proceedings. But anyway, Hydra is largely unchanged. There's still no cars. Donkeys transport people around the island. Outside of the whitewashed harbour, it's still empty. The ocean's all around you, and the clear waters of the island fall off hundreds of feet just off the shore. And there's fish everywhere. Sadly, most of them are just a few inches long, unlike when Leonard Cohen arrived there in 1960. Last weekend, the United Nations Special Envoy for the Ocean, Peter Thompson, convened 60 ocean thinkers to discuss the key challenges that we're all facing. And this was bookended by the UN Ocean Decade Conference in Barcelona and the Our Ocean Conference in Athens. So it's been a bit of an ocean conference marathon. And I'm going to quickly take you through some reflections on what we heard at those conferences. So firstly, the bad news. We're midway through the decade and we're miles off the 30% target. Every day between now and 2030, we need a marine protected area about the size of Taiwan, 30,000 square kilometers. And we also need to protect the right 30%. Marine protected areas need to think like fish and like tuna and like turtles, and country boundaries don't really mean anything to marine life. So we need ecological connectivity. At the moment, we have 8% protection of the world's oceans. It's gone down recently a little, but only 3% is genuinely protecting marine life. The reality is most of the commitments we're celebrating are paper parks. And while the world's dragging its feet, we are losing marine life really rapidly. All major migratory species are in decline. We've lost 71% of sharks. Of the 7 species of turtles, 6 are endangered. And on the high seas, it's no better. I know we've lost Leonard. The high seas are tragic. You know, we've got 4 nations doing 80% of fishing. It's completely inequitable. So how are we going to sort this out? How are we going to rescue Sustainable Development Goal 14, Life Below Water, which is the least funded of all of the Sustainable Development Goals by miles? And there's several key ambitions that Blue Marine and our many partners are trying to secure. We need to make marine protected areas into genuine sanctuaries. Greece's announcement last year is huge, and it should, the rest of the EU, the pressure's on them now to follow suit. We need to get these destructive activities out of marine protected areas. Protection must mean protection. We've also got to believe in this 30% target and celebrate those that go beyond it. The Dominican Republic was huge. You know, other countries like Panama has protected well over 50% of its waters. These are huge things, and the money must follow that. We must support and encourage this ambition. We're starting to see transboundary, ecologically coherent, climate-smart networks of MPAs. I know Rory's going to talk about that more, so I won't steal his thunder. Rashid Sumaila, who some of you in the room will know, is a fantastic ocean economist. He says we should just leave alone things that live a long way away from us or live a long time. We're not very good at leaving stuff alone. Antarctica and the high seas, they're vital life support systems for the planet, and we can't even get their protection right. There's got to be a global moratorium on deep sea mining, you know? We have seen great progress by the UK government last year, reversing its position after lots of hard work by so many people in this room. But yeah, we need to leave these places that are far away from us alone. A lot of the activities we currently permit are insane. Whaling, shark fisheries, IUU, and even overfishing within legal fisheries, as George pointed out earlier, subsidizing harmful activities. These practices are insane in the middle of a biodiversity crisis. So I'm really proud of the work that our investigatory and economics units and our legal units are doing to shine a light into these places. The role of the ocean as a climate change solution must be recognized. Blue carbon habitat should be completely protected. And where recovery is impossible without it, they must be restored. And amid all of these challenges, we need to do these things equitably, respecting the rights of indigenous people and local communities. That's stipulated in the Global Biodiversity Framework. So the vested interests that exploit the ocean and impact the climate are aggressive and forceful and demanding in how they approach these topics. They're well-resourced and they don't take no for an answer. So we collectively, both within Blue Marine Foundation and our supporters, need to be brave and ambitious and demanding in calling for positive change for the ocean. As you've heard today, Blue Marine has these things in abundance, and we're fighting to get SDG 14 back on track. When Leonard Cohen sang, "There's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in," he wasn't talking about marine conservation, but he might as well have been, because we've got to all be that light. And I'll pass you over to Jude to set out our ambitious plans for the high seas.
Hi, good afternoon. As you've heard, quite a few of us have just come back from the Our Ocean Conference in Panama. This is the 9th Our Ocean Conference. It's been running for 10 years. Greece, yeah. It was a long flight. It's been a long few weeks, yeah. Last 10 years. And over those 10 years, there's been over 2,100 commitments. Yeah. And yet, with those 2,100 commitments, we're still only at 8% of the oceans protected. And there's only 3% that is fully protected. So as Dan mentioned, we need a new MPA every day the size of Taiwan, or another statistic I heard was based on the average size of marine protected areas, we need 40 new protected areas a day if we want to hit 30% by 2030. We need countries to step up and to designate 30% within their waters, so within the waters that belong to that country, within that 200 nautical miles from the shoreline. And we heard from Greece, getting their countries right now, and the Dominican Republic, they have stepped up. They are taking that challenge. But we also need to go further and look at the boundaries outside of national jurisdiction, those areas outside. This satellite image is very telling. The lighter bits that you can see, they show fishing intensity. The really bright blue, that's a lot of fishing happening in the water. The dark bits, that's where there's no fishing. So it shows the huge and impressively well-protected marine reserves around Ascension, St. Helena and Tristan da Cunha. 3 amazing UK overseas territories that have been protected, as Adrian talked about in his presentation, as part of the UK government's Blue Belt programme. So these are vast oases where fish and marine mammals can live, feed and multiply, safe from the onslaught of ever more efficient industrial fishing. But highly migratory species like sharks, whales and sea turtles, they don't swim within national boundaries. They swim everywhere. They're over the whole ocean. So we need to look at protecting the high seas. So what is the high seas? We've mentioned that a lot. So the high seas is effectively everything outside of the national boundaries. So you can see on here these lines. These represent where a country has its national jurisdiction. So the high seas is everything else, everything outside of that. And so to protect these migratory species, we need to start protecting the high seas. So in these waters, they're mostly long liners with lines of hundreds of kilometers of baited hooks, squid jiggers, purse seine vessels. And we've heard of the terrible practices of these types of fishing from Jess and Priel. And we've heard from Kaya and George of the madness that the vessels fishing in these waters wouldn't even be economically viable if it wasn't for those hefty subsidies. The high seas covers nearly half of the Earth's surface. These vast open ocean and deep sea environments are ecologically important and critical for migratory species, so your charismatic species like your whales, but your commercially important species like your tunas. They hold a vast marine biodiversity of the whole oceans, yet only 1% of the high seas are actually fully protected. Last year, the BBNJ Treaty, so the areas that are of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, means that the process is underway to allow the creation of marine protected areas in these high seas regions. So how do we do this? How do we actually create a high seas MPA? We don't actually really know yet. It's very new. So let's start by looking at how do we create a protected area within a country's economic zone. So we generally break it down in like 4 steps. 1, justify. So like we did in Jersey, we look to say, what's the conservation gain? Where are the important areas? What are we protecting and why? And let's gather that baseline information to show and provide the evidence to protect that area. 2, collaborate. What partnerships are needed to deliver this ambition and work with local governments and on-the-ground NGOs and other stakeholders like the fishing communities in Greece? We need to engage. We need to understand the challenges to protection from the eyes of the stakeholders, from the fishers, and find ways to address these and how to unlock and tackle these issues. And then we need to designate. It's not just the legislation, but it's the ongoing management and enforcement to ensure these areas are actually effective once they're protected. There are several areas in the high seas which are strong candidates for protection, including the Sargasso Sea, the Emperor Seamount, and the Tasman Sea. But there's another one, which is here in the Atlantic, called the Walvis Ridge. And this is the area that Blue Marine is championing to be one of the first high seas marine protected areas. Walvis, meaning whale in Dutch or Afrikaans, tells us just how important this area is. And it's not just important to whales, but also deep sea corals, sharks, albatross. So let's consider, how do we protect the walvis using those 4 steps? So justify. How are we going to justify that this is an important area? So Blue Marine commissioned a baseline report to gather all of the evidence that we currently know and look to be able to provide the evidence of why this area is so important. Collaborate. Working in the high seas must be coastal state led. We need to make sure we have partners with the areas that are surrounding this area. So working with our partner on the ground, the Namibia Nature Foundation, but also looking to form collaborations with South Africa and Angola, as well as the UK overseas territories, which all border around this impressive deep sea seamount. We need to engage, we need to work with the local governments. So how do we get them on board? So we need to bring them together in a coalition, have a workshop, start to get people to discuss this and understand the importance of this region and how they can be the leaders in getting it protected. And then we need to designate. Now, that's going to be the not so simple, but we're not really sure. The process is still a work in progress of how that's going to happen. The rumor is that it's going to be through the regional fishery management organizations. So we're taking an active step on that. And Johnny, who's our head of policy here, and it's fantastic, we're deploying him to be an observer at SIAFO, which is the Southeast Atlantic Fisheries Organization, which is the regional fishery management organization for this area. So he can start to work with that organization and look for the options of how we actually get this area designated. While we continue to advocate for the 60 countries that are needed to sign and ratify the High Seas Treaty so that it can create that legal protection on the high seas, we can see clearly that we can't just sit and wait. We must generate the momentum so that stakeholders, decision makers, and coastal communities are fully aware of how critical these areas are, and make sure that the Walvis Ridge is well known, and that as soon as we have that ratification of the High Seas Treaty, we can take immediate action to protect these places. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. We now have our final presentation from Rory Moore, who's our head of conservation. Rory, you look surprised.
Put the map up, stay great. Thanks, David. Sorry about the slightly weird map. I made it, clearly. Welcome to my brain. All of these species migrate, and they are all connected in one way or another. And I'm going to talk a bit about migration because it's key to us winning this battle. I don't think we should be too obsessed with the 30% number. It is important, but we should be obsessed with the deadline of 2030, because what that has done is it's created momentum. Never in history has there been such support, financial support, NGO support, government support for ocean conservation. So that is good news indeed. And things are moving very, very, very quickly. This is 30% protection of our oceans is hugely ambitious if you think about it. And we're trying to do this in just a few decades. So, and I'm optimistic. I think we will hit 30%, but I don't think it's going to be 30% necessarily in all of the right places. But eventually we'll find them, because we've got an excellent science team, and we're identifying the areas that should be protected, and we're starting to understand better which migration routes need to be protected in which seasons, in the high seas work that Jude talked about. But there, aside from the 30% and beyond, I hope we go beyond that. We have to focus on a few key species and ecosystems. Firstly, we have to protect the lower part of the food chain. It's essential. So by that, I mean the krill, the prawns, the Humboldt squid, the sardines, the herring. These species are key. Not only are they food for most of the other species in the sea, but when we catch them, we do a huge amount of damage. We don't just catch them. When we catch sardines or krill or squid, we have a huge amount of bycatch, which means a huge amount of waste. Waste is a massive problem. We're trying to feed the planet, and we're wasting 30% of the fish at least, probably more, and we haven't got enough fish in the sea. So the waste and the bycatch is really, really significant here. The penguins in Namibia are starving because there's no sardines. The penguins in Argentina are literally starving because there's no sardines. So the penguin populations are going down. The Humboldt squid are getting hammered by the Chinese fishery, which sits just off the 200-mile mark of Chile. They've taken so many of these squid that they've altered the entire ecosystem of the Sea of Cortez. Orcas, which traditionally would feed on Humboldt squid, have started to kill blue whales because that's what's there to eat. So you see the knock-on effects of wiping out a sort of a baseline species. Coral, and you may have read that coral's having a bit of a rough time recently. We're going through a severe bleaching event because the seas are warming. Coral migrates too, actually, and coral spreads as it reproduces. And we have a fantastic project in Raja Ampat in Indonesia, where these corals seem to be incredibly resilient to climate change. So that gives me great hope. We need to keep the corals. It's crucial. This prawn here is rather important too, because what's happening is that most prawns you'll find in any supermarket in the UK come from Argentina. When you get those prawns, they are trawling the seabed, and they are taking every single baby hake. Hake used to be a huge fishery in Argentina. Now it's collapsed. It can't recover because we're trawling the prawns and taking all the hake with it. These are quite specific interventions we can make, which will make a huge difference. Secondly, a lot of these bait fish, sardines, they go directly into feeding animals and fish. They go into chicken farms, they go into pig farms, they go into fish feed farms. And that is the sort of dilemma of aquaculture. Aquaculture may save us if we can start finding a protein that we can feed the fish, and then and grow the fish not in the sea, in enclosed enclosed cages so it doesn't have a terrible impact. The pollution from aquaculture can be terrible. Fish escape into the marine environment, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I see aquaculture as a solution, and there are some very important investment funds that are investing in this kind of technology and innovative aquaculture, which is going to have a huge impact going forward. Thirdly, we have to protect the giant wanderers, the ocean giants, the whales, the manta rays, the orcas, the sharks and the sturgeon. There tend to be less of them, so they're extremely vulnerable to extinction. And extinction is extinction. When you lose a species, that's it. We're not bringing it back. And sturgeon is a classic example. We've already lost 4 or 5, or I think perhaps 6 species of sturgeon. We'll never see those fish again. They've been around for 400 million years, and we've lost them. So we cannot let that happen with any more of the species of sturgeon or the sharks. The whales are actually doing very well, apart from the northern right whales, which are having a rough time. But most whales are doing very, very well. So that's a huge win. Well done, Greenpeace, mainly. The new big battle for us is sharks. Sharks are taking an absolute hammering. The market for sharks was accidental. We never meant to have shark's fin soup or eat their meat. They were just coming up as bycatch, so we created a market for them. It's completely ridiculous. We should not be catching any sharks at all. But we've killed 70% of them, so we've got some work to do. Finally, the habitats, and Dan mentioned this, the importance of habitats like Posidonia, seagrass beds, and mangroves, because they produce oxygen and they absorb carbon dioxide. Also, healthy marine ecosystems are far more resilient to climate change than unhealthy marine ecosystems. They're also more resilient to invasive species. And I'm not going to go into invasive species because I'm running out of time. It's another thing that we have to deal with, because things are in places that they shouldn't be and causing trouble. So I think if I was a betting man, I would be betting on marine conservation wins right now. These next 5.5 years leading up to 2030 are crucial. We've got the momentum. We don't have nearly enough money. And that's what that's what we do. We fundraise, and when we get it, we spend it on excellent projects, and we try and fix this situation. I'm feeling good about it. I think we'll get to a really good point by 2030, and then I think for the next decade we'll start refining, and we'll start getting these management plans so they're working as efficiently as they can. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much, first of all, to all of you for enduring what a sort of half marathon, really. So well done for sitting, for watching, for absorbing all this information. But above all, I want to thank so much my completely amazing colleagues who spoke so brilliantly and articulately and passionately, and hopefully gave you a sense of some of what we're up to. But as I say that, I can see whole bunches of more brilliant, articulate and passionate colleagues who haven't spoken today. So we'll do this again. You'll hear from others, but there's lots of us, and everyone's brilliant. And so thank you to all my colleagues.